I'm Patricia. Thank you for being here today. It's a super exciting day for me and I'm sure for all of you. And yeah, as you know, we're going to be looking at the power of prompt engineering. I am the prompt engineer in the GenAI team here at Aurecon. What does that mean? I'm still trying to figure it out. So I went to Firefly, the image generator, and typed in prompt engineer and got a visual representation of what that might look like. And I don't know if it's really representative, but it's an interesting problem to kind of define what prompt engineering really is at this early stage of generative AI. And I think Theo kind of described it to me as like a prompt librarian when I first started. That was this concept of kind of being someone that collects prompts and collects like expert knowledge from around the business and organizes that in some way like a librarian does with knowledge and books. So I really liked that approach, but then Dave also kind of said this quote here that as soon as he said it, it clicked and I went, yep, this is for me, where it's someone who can get the most out of the tech. And I think that really stuck with me because that's exactly what it really is at the base of it. It's not really about just writing the best prompt you can. It's more about like, what is that process to the actual order of the prompts, or, you know, is a prompt the best solution or is it a different part of the generative AI process? Is there some other non-prompt part or multimodal solution or something different that you can approach it from in a different angle to get the most out of the tech? So yeah, they're kind of the two ways I like to define it now. And it all really centers around kind of sharing knowledge to empower the experts. So I guess you guys being the experts, my main goal as a prompt engineer has ended up kind of being giving you the knowledge that you need to be able to be empowered to build the solutions you want to build. So the big part of it for me is sharing that knowledge and yeah, building understanding for all of you so that you feel like you can actually approach generative AI and make something really cool with it. So yeah, and then the last piece of the puzzle is this researching of best practices and techniques and keeping up as they emerge so that I'm actually passing on good knowledge to you and so that you're able to build with the latest ideas and build with the latest technologies. So yeah, it's a little bit different to the image that was generated in the end, I think. So going back to this what does it take question, I think for me, the middle one is the main thing that draws me to this role. Creativity and logic is what I'm all about. I really like the balance of using your creative side and using your logical side. And generative AI needs that so badly right now, especially because it's so new. We need to be thinking of new ways to approach the technology and creating just completely new paths that other people maybe haven't thought of. The workflows are not there yet. We get to be the ones that make those workflows, and that's such a creative process. But the workflows themselves are actually quite logical and they require a very logical side of your brain. So I think when you're approaching your tools and your tasks, I'd really encourage you to switch between the two mindsets. If you usually work in one mindset and not the other, just try to think which hat you have on and switch them out, because that's when you start seeing your solutions really grow and develop into something that's really, really successful and unique. I think that's really the goal with generative AI, is making things that are unique. And then flexibility on the left. So I think flexibility, obviously, with it being evolving, that landscape of generative AI, like Theo mentioned in his talk, is just you fall asleep, you wake up, you feel like you've missed something because it's moving that fast. So being flexible with that is really important. And especially when you do have an idea, like Fuchs said about killing your darlings, as he put it, just moving with the flow of technology as it changes and being okay to let your idea kind of fade and put it in the corner so that it can then adapt with the technology rather than getting stuck with the certain type of technology that's no longer the best tool for the use case. So yeah, the flexibility really helps you keep up with the evolving landscape and kind of approach the thought of developing over time and really thinking about how time will change your approach and moving with that rather than against that. And then the last bit is the design and interaction. So surprisingly with this role, there is such a focus around kind of always bringing it back to the user. It's really everything I've ever learned about UX and UI really comes in handy with this kind of role and this kind of thinking. So designing prompts with the end user experience in mind and kind of working through not just what solution you think is great, but questioning the solution you're coming up with and then pulling it back to the actual user flow or the user journey and finding holes in that user journey so that you're not creating something that isn't really going to apply anywhere at the end of the day. So I think focusing on prompts that deliver real value and solve problems is really important as well. So really kind of nailing down on where the value is and picking a task with intention that is going to help one individual at the end of the day, really focusing on that one individual and knowing that that represents a wider group and finding that balance between understanding that you're having a lot of value and you're influencing a lot of people, but you're still imagining one person at a computer interacting with the tool you make or the logical flow of prompts that you make. The most important part is this expert knowledge, and that's why I'm so grateful to have you all here today. And we're going to be doing some interactive work with Secure ChatGPT to kind of start building out some of your ideas and hopefully bring them to life even just in this session. So yeah, connecting the experts with the GenAI knowledge and skills they need to realize their ideas. So hopefully you guys have come into the room with a lot of ideas already, as I'm sure you have, but we're going to go through this interactive guide now on how to kind of isolate that task and then build it to something even within this 45 minutes that is usable. So isolating a task, how do you do it? We've talked a lot about the importance of it being high value. And I think with this aspect of saving time and speeding up a process, I think it's good to approach it as some sort of task that you or your team might do so much of the time that you think just could be better spent somewhere else. They're kind of the tasks we want to look to adapt GenAI into so that we can change that process from being quite mundane and not actually using your expert knowledge in that point in time, but then expanding that out so that that one part of the puzzle is solved with generative AI, and then you have more time to actually do the thinking and bring your expert knowledge to the table with that time that you've saved. So have a think about what this might be for you. The other 2 points that if you are struggling to kind of hone down on what a good idea might be for this task is something that kind of utilizes this idea of reading what's written between the lines or understanding the context of something a little bit deeper. I think generative AI can play a really good role in just using lots of context and providing some output that reads between the lines. So maybe that'll spark some ideas for you there. And then lastly, tasks that surface value from data that would otherwise sit dormant. So anything that you think is really, you have so much data maybe in one place or another that kind of once the project is done or once you move to the next part of the project, that data kind of gets lost. Anything like that could be a really good opportunity to not just let it sit dormant, but start to get something out of that would have otherwise not even been looked at. So hopefully that'll spark some ideas for you. Have you all kind of got a task in mind? Yeah? Okay, because we're moving on. We're moving fast today. So now that we have the task, yeah? How do we break it up? So I look at it as the before, the during, and the after. The before is the data. The data is a really big problem sometimes. This is where we need a clean and consistent data set of some sort. So with your task in mind, what is that data set? Is it clean? Is it consistent? Is there some work that needs to be done before we even start with the prompts to get that data set in the right space? Next is formats. So once we actually start tackling this problem, we're going to need to know what technology we're going to use. So do you have PDFs? Are they Excel documents? What's the actual format? Is it multimodal? Do you have images, videos? Have a think about the format because that will help inform your approach going forward. Next, the example documents. So you have the data that is specifically related to the task that you absolutely need to do the task, but then you also have past examples of you doing that task. And that can be really valuable in the process if you're able to bring that in as an example in the prompt to then inform what you want the AI to then generate. So have a think about, where does that live on your computer, the past examples of you filling out that task? Is that something you can bring into the prompt? And then lastly, contextual informations, maybe like standards, anything that sits outside of what you absolutely need to do the task. So basically, when you are sitting to do the task, what do you flip your window to double check, to inform your knowledge, to remind you of your expert knowledge, or to remind you of what the client requirements are, or things like that. So that is also really valuable, and that can be brought into the prompt. So you kind of have your absolute necessary data, your examples of past data, and then your contextual data. You have the 3 sets. And then we come to jury. So this is where we actually define what the problem is that we're trying to solve. And this is where the expert in the loop is really crucial. So thinking about the prompt, is it just going to be you ask it to do one task and then it generates the insight or the answer and you take that? Or do you want it to generate something that the expert then comes in and gives more information and then generates something after that? So keeping that expert in the loop, keeping it hands on the wheel in the driver's seat, where can you kind of break up your prompt to then provide information along the journey? And then lastly, the after part. So what is your output? What are you actually wanting to receive from the AI? What's getting generated? And why is that useful to you? So this is where you think about the user. This is where you want to think about insights and not answers. So again, the expert in the loop, we talk about wanting to kind of get something that is not going to be sent straight to a client, or that's the be all and end all and we take it as fact. We want to generate something that is going to help us do our task better, or surface something that we otherwise wouldn't have surfaced. It helps us get some sort of new perspective or new idea on the task. And then visualize a user journey. So with all of that in mind, coming to that output, what is the user journey to get there? And that will help inform what this prompt structure might look like and where the process needs to stop in order to add more information. So to my example, and you'll be kind of filling out a similar example with 5 minutes in a second. The first thing that came to mind when I was kind of talking about how it's important to keep up with prompting techniques in my role, right? So my idea was, I'll make something that summarizes academic papers. So that is a very surface level task. It's very simple, but you'll see that as we start digging, that idea evolves. So first, the documents that are needed are the academics' papers to be summarized. And then follow the bold prompts when you're doing this yourself and try and fill out the rest of the sentence. So more specifically, a single prompt engineering related paper per task. So I'm just kind of nailing down on my prompt will just have one paper. I don't really need to be summarizing multiple at one time. I'm happy with just one at a time. So what's actually going in is the single paper. And then how big is this paper? This again, the same way of defining what, is it a PDF? Is it an Excel sheet? It's really important to define how big that paper or that piece of data is, because that will also inform the approach that you take. If it's too big, we have to look at other methods other than just putting it straight into ChatGPT. So an academic paper, for example, we'll say is on average 15 pages, the format PDFs. I could clean the data by extracting text first with other tools, perhaps. When read by an LLM, data will be lost, including the figures. So it's really important to think about what tool are you putting it into. If you're putting it into a large language model like we'll be doing today, all of those images and anything else in that data is going to be lost. And how will that inform your approach? To remedy this in the future, we can explore multimodal solutions. So starting with an easy win, we'll just kind of have that multimodal idea as a bit of an end goal and just stick to knowing in our minds that we've lost the information from the figures. And then the task. So again, this is defining the problem. So the model will transform, and then I've got the input, the academic paper, into, And then I've got the stuff from the output. So I've got useful insights to help the user engage in better prompting techniques when developing projects. And right there, I've just gotten more to the point of what my actual solution is. So all of a sudden, it's not really just a summary. It's actually insights to help a prompt engineer use prompting techniques when developing projects. So with that in mind, now that we've complicated our task a little bit more and made it more specific to the user, the next question we ask is, another piece of information that could be useful to the model is, and I've got context on projects the user is planning to use this knowledge for. So now all of a sudden we can actually apply the information and the summaries from the paper to the actual projects and actual context that the user is currently working on. So we're really just filling in the gaps and creating a much more useful and user-specific task. And then again, another piece of information that could be useful to the model is what the user doesn't understand from the generated summary. So thinking about that user journey, once it's generated, what could go wrong? Maybe the user doesn't quite understand it, it's not to the level. So how are we going to approach that so that we can connect more questions to get the knowledge that we need? And then lastly, with surfaced insights, the user wants useful insights to help users engage better in prompting techniques when developing projects. So it might be good when you're approaching this task to do the left first, and then the right, and then the middle becomes really easy. And then the user wants to grow their knowledge of prompting engineering techniques. So any questions with that one? We'll start with 5 minutes. Cool. So write this anywhere. We're going to get into Secure ChatGPT next, but this is just kind of defining the task. All right, it's a bit of a sprint, so get ready. 5 minutes, go. How did you go? Some worried faces, that's okay. As much as you've got, hopefully you've got the idea now of how to kind of break up a task into something that's a bit more specific. But obviously when you spend more time doing something like that, you'll start to really get a tool that could be really useful. So now we're going to open Secure ChatGPT in Recall. So open up the Recall app, the Recall website. You can find it through Hive if you are a bit lost. And if you can't find it, just feel free to use ChatGPT. But yeah, navigate to Secure ChatGPT for me. Awesome. So how do we then take that tool or that task that we've defined into an actual solution? So the first thing to do is just to write a prompt and to test it. So writing a prompt is all about context. Giving it as much context as you can will help to kind of slow down the way in which the large language model breaks down the task and does it in a way that is defined by how you would usually do it. So we have some structure points here. The first one is persona. So to write a persona, you would write something like, you are a research assistant for a prompt engineer who builds generative AI products for an engineering firm. So you can see already in that first sentence, we have gotten a lot of context about what the actual problem is we're trying to solve. We're centering it around the user and starting off really strong with that persona. Next is the task understanding. So if you were to just write a one sentence prompt, that would be the task understanding. This is the part that is just the task with as much context as you can give. So your task is to help me understand an academic paper about prompt engineering to help me engage in better prompting techniques when developing projects. So that part's quite simple. That's what you would usually put as a prompt. Then the task recipe. So this is the really important part. This is where we give it an actual approach to follow and we slow down the thinking a little bit. So first, you will read and understand the entire paper. Then you will create a summary based on the main findings and essential points. Next, you will surface valuable insights that will help me as a prompt engineer. Then you will provide ideas about how I could implement this knowledge into my current project based on the provided brief. Finally, you will prepare to answer follow-up questions in order to fill gaps in my knowledge so I can understand the paper fully. Make sense? So we kind of get this really step-by-step approach of first, second, lastly, and that gives it a really defined way to do the task in the same way that you would usually do it. Then, to do this, end your answer with, do you have any questions that will help me provide you with more clarity? So you're able to kind of give it this language that you want it to use, and that will also help define how the result will generate. Then we have answer in short sentences using only the most essential information. So this is where we kind of have some guidelines. Anything that's an asterisk on your project, you can kind of put as a guideline. Anything that maybe you've generated an answer and it's done something wrong, you can go back to the guideline part of the prompt and say, maybe don't do that, do it this way. So give it a really specific way and correct any errors in your prompt. And then answer formatting. So you can specify how you want the result to look. You can say you want it in a table, or you want it in a short paragraph, a long paragraph, and then data input at the end. So if you have any data in Secure ChatGPT, you can attach it as a document with the button on the left that you can see just in the bottom left there. You can put your data in there, or like I have at the bottom where I've put the current project brief, the extra bit of data. You could also just paste the text in the prompt and give it that name, that subheading, so that it knows that that's the data. All right, let's give it a go. We have another 5 minutes, and you have some more bold prompts to follow if you're a bit confused. All right, we're back. Now, if you're like really far from finishing, don't stress. We have some time to kind of keep going with this one. Again, iteration is the most important thing, and the same goes with prompting. So this is where we start to iterate your prompt. I have test. So it's so important with prompt engineering to test it. That is how you write your prompt. It's actually getting it into the AI, seeing what it gives you, and then changing your prompt to actually get more accurate results. So based on your first result, find the flaws and areas for improvement, add to the guidelines section of your prompt to make changes wherever necessary, and then start a new Secure ChatGPT session. So go back to apps, go to Secure ChatGPT, and then repaste your prompt in and try again with your new changes, and just keep repeating this. You have another 5 minutes, see what you can come up with in that time. Okay, it's looking a bit more confident now. Let's move on to the next part. Now we get a bit more exciting. So we've got our first prompt. This is where we get into the good stuff. So how do we break up this prompt into more of an actual like task like a human would do it? You usually have more than one thing, more than one prompt. So we have this idea of a chain of prompts to kind of expand this part of the prompt that was the task recipe. So have a look at the task recipe you've written, where you have first, second, lastly, and then think about what parts of that task recipe could be extracted out into its own entire prompt. Now, this is where we'll start kind of seeing actual improvement and more specific answers to what we generate, and we're able to then not just put it all in the box and press enter, but press enter once, get an answer, maybe even use that answer for the next prompt and get a better answer. So thinking about this idea of chaining a group of prompts together. So it gives the model even more time to think, same as we were trying to do with the task understanding, where we were breaking it down into steps. We're now breaking it down into multiple prompts and giving it more time to think. So find parts of the answer that you've generated now that you wish went into more depth. So this part will be the part that you then expand and bring some new reasoning in to then generate more specific and complex information. So you can see with my prompt here, the summary was pretty good, the insights were pretty good, but the implementation ideas I felt were kind of lacking. So we have, for your current project, you can leverage the TOT framework to improve the prompt optimization process by using the model you can explore different reasoning paths and generate sequence of optimized prompts based on intermediate thoughts. So it's not really being very specific to the brief that I gave it. And that's because it's quite a small part of what the prompt was trying to do, and it didn't really have enough time to develop its ideas fully. So with our old prompt, looking into that box at the top and the one at the bottom is the relevant part to what made that part generate. So we have the part of the task recipe that says, then you will provide ideas about how I could implement this knowledge into my current project brief on the provided brief. So that part is the one that we're going to extend out into its whole entire new prompt. So now we would have prompt 1, which is the previous prompt, generate a summary, and prompt 2, that's all about expanding the prompt based on the summary that we've generated. So generating an implementation of ideas for the project. Now, I've brought this back up. You can see that finding chances to expand the reasoning prior to submitting this prompt is exactly what we've done here. So we've found the part that we want to expand from that prompt, and we've created a new one, and that is the summary. So now looking at the use generated information to go even further, we could add a third prompt that says expanded, that is an expanded prompt based on selection using the summary. So generate implementation of ideas for project and using the list of relevant methodologies. So have a look at your results, your task recipe, and start breaking that down. You've got another 5 minutes. I'll come around if you have any questions. Well done, everyone. That was the last exercise. We'll come back together now and just wrap up. How do we kind of go further than this? There's definitely a lot more to the puzzle. There's a lot of different techniques emerging. That's why the research is really important. Communicating that to you is what my main goal is. So I thought I'd go through 3 really interesting ones now. The first being trying multiple approaches and then combining. So this is something I've tested where I might say, try this prompt or like generate this answer using a creative mindset. And then I'll do the exact same prompt, but instead of the word creative, I'll change it with logical. And then I'll get 2 completely different answers because I've tried 2 multiple approaches. And then I'll merge them together and I'll say I'll somehow get an even more improved prompt because I have these different generated answers working together to give a really accurate or a new diverse way of thinking to get to that answer. So you're not limited to one particular approach. You can generate an answer using a logical one and then a creative one, or maybe just a different task recipe, different steps to get to different answers, and then merge these to get a more accurate answer. So if you're interested in that, you can do some research on self-consistency is the word you want to research for that. Next is giving examples. So like we said at the start, you can really strengthen your answer if you have examples of what you want to be generated. So the word for this one is few shot, and that's where you basically put examples of what you're expecting to be generated into the actual prompt, and then it has way more guidance as to what it's trying to generate for you and will be much more accurate. And then lastly, creating the missing information. So this was Theo's favorite on his presentation, counterfactuals. So there's a lot of different ways to do this, but think about what extra information is needed to solve the task. And if you don't have it available to you, maybe you can generate it. So that kind of synthetic generation can really help to inform what the answer is. And yeah, generating that data that you can even maybe test your prompt with could be good. So if you've generated something that is going to expect questions in and get answers out, you can generate a set of questions and then use those questions to really quickly test your prompt. So yeah, if you get stuck with not having the right data, try and generate the data. And that can be a really interesting approach to getting new solutions. And then lastly, this is kind of throwing back to you guys now of how would you scale this? What would your approach be to bringing this to your teams? How can you scale your solution and where do you want to go from here? That's all kind of in your hands, that's something you can really make big change with now that you have even just a really simple tool that you spent just a couple of minutes building. How can you then scale that? It's a really interesting and exciting thing that I can't wait to see you all do. So that's all from me. Thank you so much for doing the tasks and doing it so quickly. Hopefully you've got some ideas now or some more guidance of where to go. Awesome. Thank you.